it's been a very big evening. Obviously, we've all seen the breaking news coming out of the UK where the Prime Minister has resigned. Joining us now from London is UK correspondent Rylee Carlson. Rylee, very big day over there. Tell me, what's the latest from Number 10? We saw Boris present to the media. We heard the crowd behind him basically saying, "See you later, Boris." What's the mood like?
Well, that's the thing, Jenna, it depends on where you are and it depends on who you ask. Boris Johnson made a point in that resignation speech of saying the reason it's taken him so long to decide to step down is because he felt a duty and an obligation to the millions of people who voted for him, who gave him that landslide victory for the Conservatives in 2019. So he really feels that the majority of people in the United Kingdom still support his government. Of course, there's at least 60 MPs and aides in the Conservative Party itself that have decided they don't support Boris Johnson anymore, and that's what forced his hand to force him to resign this afternoon.
Yeah, it was really interesting listening to that speech where he talks about just being behind in the polls by a couple of points. But, you know, some newspapers say he's basically down the polls by minus 21% and his approval rating is absolutely in the toilet. And we saw him when he arrived at St Paul's just a couple of weeks ago during the Queen's Jubilee. He was booed by the crowd. When you've been out and about, what's the general consensus in the public, the general public, about Boris Johnson?
I mean, it has changed significantly over the last little while. But again, it does depend on where you are. If you are in London, you will hear very different sentiments about Boris Johnson than you will hear in some other parts of the country, for example. But that being said, there has been a big change in the way that people feel about Boris Johnson over the last couple of months. There have been some really significant scandals that have come to light. Of course, the Partygate scandal that everybody's heard about, Number 10, and his MPs breaking lockdown rules, he himself breaking those lockdown rules that they imposed. Well, people couldn't visit their families during COVID, couldn't see their loved ones in the hospitals or in nursing homes. So things like that really sort of this everyman image that Boris Johnson has portrayed through his tenure as Prime Minister, those kinds of scandals really took a hit at them and really took a chip away from them. And that's why Boris had such high approval ratings, is because people felt like they knew him, like they could go to the pub with him, and things like that made them feel like maybe he's not really the person we thought he was.
Yeah, indeed. And it feels like there has been so many scandals over the past couple of years. We saw COVID and the rolling lockdowns that you had in the UK. But then this Chris Pincer situation, it seems that there were so many leaks coming out of Number 10 regarding a lot of ministers and even their families at some point in time. Was this the straw that broke the camel's back, or was it actually probably one of the biggest scandals that Johnson did face during his premiership?
I think it's probably both. I mean, it is definitely the straw that broke the camel's back, which we saw with all these resignations, but it is probably also going to be one of the biggest scandals that his government has faced, that Chris Pincher was appointed to government, apparently with the Prime Minister knowing that he had these sexual misconduct allegations against him. And so that's why we saw in a lot of these resignations people saying, you know, this is a moral code, sort of a moral compass that we can't get behind. This is a big problem, and this is indicative that this Conservative Party needs to find a new way. And we saw that when those resignations kicked off. But what's really interesting about these resignations, Jenna, is normally when we see parties in this kind of system say they don't have confidence in their leader, they all get together, they all sign it, and they all put all of their weight behind it together. And what we've been seeing over the last 48 hours is just these dominoes dropping one by one by one by one that just adds to the drama of what Boris Johnson has actually been facing here.
Absolutely. And I guess now all eyes will now point to who could potentially replace him. Will there be a caretaker Prime Minister? Dominic Raab seems to be a name that's been coming up quite frequently in the past couple of days. We saw the former Chancellor resign. He's resigned. Does that mean that he can potentially move back into his to a seat on the front bench?
Well, he could. I mean, a new chancellor has been appointed, so I guess it would depend on who takes over as Prime Minister. Boris Johnson did say in his resignation speech that he intends to serve as Prime Minister until a new leader is appointed, hopefully by the Conservative Party caucus in October. Whether or not the party allows him to do that, we will see. They may decide that having him there and just keeping that bit of instability or stability, whichever way you want to see it, is sort of the lesser of two evils right now, instead of bringing in another sort of caretaker prime minister, and then somebody else again in October. So we'll see what the Conservative Party decides there, but it seems like Boris Johnson is keen to appoint a government and stay in his current position until somebody else is found.
Wow. Well, Rylee Carlson, CNN correspondent over in London, thank you so very much for joining us on Sky News Australia this evening. You take care.